And I walked as fast as I could to the other side of the lobby, and I just had enough time to embrace him and whisper in his ear, "Charlie, I'm under again." And I had no idea what he was going to say, and it was too late. Everybody else was around me now, and I could feel a cold bead of sweat go down my back as I was waiting to hear him say whatever he was going to say. And luckily he played along. He said, hey, the guys in Vegas haven't seen you in a while. You're working too hard, and he just came and made something up, and later he actually helped us in the operation, and he could have definitely outed me right there, and that would have been over. But there were other times too. I mean, unfortunately, we're cops, so you got to do surveillances. There would be times when people would be dropping off $1 million, $2 million in cash at a time.
Wow.
In cities throughout the United States. And the people who come and drop that money off are of great interest to the local office. And this happened to have occurred in New York. The guy came with like $1 million, and they wanted to follow him back, thinking that they would take him to a stash house where they would have money or drugs. And I always used to beg them not to do that. I mean, not to stay tight on these guys, because there's counter surveillance. The Colombian organizations would put people out there to watch and see if there were cops around. And a lot of this money that they were giving me, I wasn't just laundering it and sending it out into the air. I convinced them to let me invest the money, so some of the money. So I would put it in. I had it in CDs. I put it into a construction company for the building of an apartment complex in downtown L.A. They were in businesses. I mean, we even through these guys were fight promoters as well, and promoted a world-class, a world championship fight in Miami Beach with some of the money. So we could get this money and seize it later. And following these guys around and getting surveillances burned could definitely cost me my life. And unfortunately, they did identify on a couple of occasions that they were being followed. And I had meetings at times when I was sitting there, and I remembered very well one time when I was accused of being a DEA undercover agent, and you just got to talk your way out of it. You got to not act like a cop. If it's a situation where if you're really a bad guy, if you're really running this kind of stuff, if you heard that there had been some surveillance out there, the first thing you would do would be to shut down your operations, not take any more money, and try to figure out where the problems are before you do anything else. If you're a cop, you'll try to say, well, who you to accuse me, and get give pushback. So I tried to do as much as I could to not act like a cop, and that probably some of my street instincts. I grew up in New York, and in the beginning of my book, I talk about the fact that my grandfather used to be part of a crew that worked for Lucky Luciano in New York. So I used to be around these people, and I know how I think I know a little bit more than the average guy about how criminals act, and I think that was a big help to me in doing that. Plus, I had a wonderful partner, a guy from Puerto Rico who's an agent, Amir Abreu. I'd say Amir's probably the most gifted undercover agent that I have ever had the pleasure to work with, and he played the street thug, and he played it well. I couldn't have played his part. He couldn't have played mine. We made a good team, and between the two of us, I think that's really what kept the thing afloat in the midst of all kinds of potential problems with the traffickers. On your second question about home life, if it wasn't for the fact I had some real advantages here. I had family that lived in the close proximity of where my wife and two children continued to live. I would come home for a day or two, after a month being out, but even that day or two, my mind was so much on that other life that I really wasn't the husband or the father that I should have been. My wife had her own profession, which was good. She's an educator. She's a first-grade teacher. And she had her hands full, being both the mom and the dad So she was pretty much too busy to sit around and worry about things. But we also, we met in high school. We've been best friends for eons, and that was a big help as well. But a real big help was the fact that my family lived in the immediate area, and they could help and fill in the void and help her when I couldn't be around. So
because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
okay.
The question I have about that is because to do that type of investigation, you might have to do things that might even compromise your wedding vows, not to get the blow under your cover. Have you even got that close under investigation?
No, in this role, I had an advantage here because I was supposed to be a mob-connected money launderer who was working for his family in New York. And my story to them simply was that, hey, because of my partner, real name Amir Abreu, who was my street manager, who educated me about the opportunities of making money with Latin America, I was given the authority to handle some of this money. And so I always would tell them, I am not going to do anything to jeopardize my principal responsibilities. And that if anybody ever got the impression that I was out of control, and I was in meetings where people were out of control, and I was there when somebody's death was ordered. A guy who was drinking a lot. He had some very attention-grabbing mannerisms about him. He was bisexual, so and he would make a big scene. At times when we're out in a social environment, they don't like that kind of stuff. These are people who expect you to act like a corporate executive. These guys could have run a Fortune 500 company if they wanted to be legit. They just happen to have a different kind of product. It costs them $500 to make a kilo and about $2,500 to move it into the U.S. And they've got some expenses for personnel, but they're making $13,000 or so on every kilo they sell, and they were bringing in tons, and they still do that today. And this is these one of my clients alone, just one client in his organization, they had $20 million a month available in 8 different cities every single month. So $160 million bucks. That's a lot of money, and they're not looking for anybody to be loose and reckless. If you're playing a lower level, street level, or a distributor type thing, you're probably going to have more of that type of a problem or challenge than I did. So nobody used drugs. The only guy that did use drugs was the guy I was talking about before, who was drawing a lot of attention. And the only reason that he continued to be in the group is he was the grandson of the president of Colombia. So he got a little bit of a pass, but ultimately they decided that he was drawing way too much attention. The way they dealt with problems was terminal. My principal client was caught by Pablo Escobar stealing money, and what he did is he summoned this guy Gerardo Moncada, summoned him and his brother before Escobar. And they hung these guys by their feet, stripped their clothes off, and used blowtorches to melt the skin off their body. So they killed them.
Wow!
It's a totally different world, a completely different world, and it's big business. It generates $400 billion a year around the globe, $65 billion just in the United States every year. So it's
wow. Now, Robert, I'm sorry, this is Kappa. Let me ask you, being that you've brought down a lot of these banks, and I'm pretty sure it hit the news, and enough people were aware that this is happening, at least on the side of the bankers or people who are potentially being corrupt bankers. Are there still banks that are willing to take these risks to launder money for these cartels?
Absolutely, and they do it in a very artful way. I got the opportunity to be face-to-face with some of these bankers. The bankers I talked with explained to me that they didn't learn this at the bank they were at. They learned it as they came through their career at different banks. I mean, some of them worked for Bank of America, some of them worked for Royal Bank of Canada. They ultimately came to BCCI, and they used the best of the best talents that they saw out there. It was their perception. They said this before they were arrested, and they told me it afterward. I mean, I was involved in debriefing the bankers, one banker for like a month, and the other one for about 2 weeks. And their position was, we don't understand. We're not doing anything different than anybody else in the international banking community. There are within the international banks, and I'm not talking about the banks on the corner where we have our savings and checking accounts, because I think domestically in the United States, those banks really do have meaningful anti-money laundering compliance programs. They file forms that they're supposed to file. They report cash transactions, all that stuff. I'm talking about international banks, and when I say international, they could be a U.S.-based international bank, but they're involved in cross-border transactions. And I'll give you an example of a bank that I mean, these banks are doing it today. Last year, Wachovia Bank entered into what's called a deferred prosecution. In my mind, that's legal speak for a slap on the wrist. What they did is they admitted to a criminal offense in connection with their receipt of roughly $400 billion in deposits from account holders in Mexico. This was during the years of 2004 through 2007. Among the services that they provided was the physical transportation of currency from Mexico back into the United States. And I say back because I can tell you from being in the business, a lot of that money was gathered on the streets of the United States major cities and then smuggled across our border south into Latin America. And then they move it oftentimes into houses of exchange, casas de cambio, in Mexico, and tried to claim that this is cash that they've got because they've been exchanging cash legitimately. $400 billion represents 1/3 of the gross national product of Mexico for an entire year. The $14 billion in bulk currency that they brought back into the United States, if it was $20 bills, and I tell you it's 5, 10s, and 20s because that's what street money is, dope money is generally 5, 10s, and 20s, at least on the wholesale level. If it was just $20 bills, the $14 billion would have weighed 725 tons. I mean, who did they think they were getting 725 tons of cash from in Mexico? It doesn't take $1,000 an hour lawyer to tell you that you're dealing with something that's weird here. And the long and short of it is, unfortunately, that with respect to the Wachovia Bank matter and several others that have happened in the last 3 or 4 years, nobody, not one banker, went to jail. They paid a $160 million fine. $160 million fine, that was 2% of their $12.3 billion profit. I don't think that's fair. One of the reasons that I was motivated to leave law enforcement was that I was not encouraged. They lost their focus at that time on working these types of cases, and they got more into the street violent type cases. And not that I condone what these two guys did, but I went to a sentencing. Two guys, they were barely out of their teens. One guy was 20, the other guy was 21. They sold crack, and they got hit the third time. I could have held in my two hands the amount of crack those guys were proven to have dealt in. They went to prison for life.
Wow.
Me, come on, man. $160 million fine, and then we got people who are going to prison for the rest of their lives.